Good afternoon and welcome to the October meeting of the Divorce Support Club with me, Claire Macklin, and Fiona Griffin, this time from Ian Walker Family Law. And today we have a brilliant special guest, Karen Kipping, who is another divorce coach, but who specialises in working with clients who are leaving abusive and coercive relationships. Can I just very briefly ask both Fiona and Karen perhaps to introduce themselves, and then I'll introduce myself and we'll get cracking with content. So Fiona, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm the head of the divorce and relationships team at Ian Walker Family Law Mediation Solicitors. I've been a qualified solicitor working solely in the family law world for 23 years. I'm a collaborative legal advisor, and I also do work in the resolution together arena as well as the more traditional family law litigation.
Very much, Karen.
Hi, thanks, Claire. I'm Karen Kipping. I'm author of Recognition to Recovery, How to Leave Your Abusive Ex Behind for Good. I'm also a divorce coach specialising in supporting people that are separating from coercive and controlling and abusive partners. Lots of my clients experience things like post-separation abuse, ongoing emotional abuse, a lot of conflict around child contact, financial abuse, and lots of them are going through family court, financial proceedings, divorce, all that kind of stuff. So that's what I do.
Thank you, Karen. And I'm Claire Macklin. I'm a breakup and divorce coach, working to help my clients navigate their way through separation and divorce and create new lives afterwards that they're excited about. So today we're here to talk about domestic abuse and the family court, and we're going to do it as a kind of interview, kind of fireside chat. So I'm going to try and ask succinct questions to allow Karen and Fiona to give the information that they have, which is so valuable. So first of all, I guess the thing that comes up quite often with my clients is that the family court system is such an alien system for most people. Most people don't want to be in this process. They don't want to be going through this. So what advice would you give to anyone who is perhaps attending a court hearing for the first time, Karen?
You're right. First of all, it is a very alien concept to most people, and it can feel very scary because all of a sudden you're in this court arena, a place where you never really wanted to be. You've usually been through mediation, lots of kind of negotiations beforehand that haven't gone well. And then all of a sudden, you receive a court application, sometimes at quite short notice, or you feel like you've had no option but to put in your own court application. And all of a sudden, here you are in the family court. Of course, it's scary. You've never been through it before. There's a lot on social media, there's a lot in the general kind of media about family court and how difficult a space it can be and how things haven't changed for years, etc., and how it doesn't understand domestic abuse. And all of those things are true. It is a difficult space to be in. You have to be prepared that it is going to be tough, but it can also be an opportunity for you to get some kind of framework, particularly in terms of how you parent your children after your separation and how that happens and how you communicate and how you make big decisions around children. It can actually give you that framework that actually for the long term can make your life a bit easier. It's not going to cover every eventuality. You may not get everything that you want for your children. The actual process that you go through, is an emotional roller coaster on top of the emotional roller coaster that you're already going through. So yeah, it is difficult, but definitely understanding the process, doing your research, educating yourself on it, getting support, getting good advice and guidance from professionals that understand that world and can help you is absolutely key. to coming out of it the other side with something that you can live with.
Yeah, that's really helpful advice, I think. Should we take a quick moment, Fiona, if you could explain perhaps what is the process, just a very brief overview of what the process that Karen's talking about looks like.
So I think there are lots of different processes depending on what particularly the problem is and what you're applying for. So there will be a different process if your case is primarily about the children, or compared to if it's primarily about financial matters. So there'll be slightly different processes at play. But in terms of preparation for hearings themselves, one of the strong recommendations that I would make is try and make an appointment to visit with the court. You can contact the court manager at the court that you're going to and explain that you're worried about coming into court, and have they got a time slot available for you to go into the court. Usually, wherever they can be, they're really happy to try and make that time for people. It is a public building, it's a public space, like going into a library or anything else. And so that can really help you to settle some nerves, because you'll see how it works when you get there. There'll be an airport style security check that you have to go through, and then you're into the court building itself, and you can go in and see where the courtrooms are, where the waiting rooms are, silly things like where the toilets are. Is there a cafe, or do you have to take change for a vending machine? Just those little things like that. Where should you park? How are you going to get there? Do yourself a dummy run, because there's nothing worse, is there, than knowing you've got to be there for 9 o'clock and it's 8:30 and you're stuck in a traffic jam. So I would really recommend doing all those things. Lean on the legal advisor that you've got. There's no such thing as a stupid question. That's what we're here for, is to answer any questions. And honestly, we don't mind if we have to go over things 2 or 3 times. That's our job. We're more than happy to do that. In terms of the process, no matter whether it's children or finances, you tend to work, most court processes will work like this. Your first hearing will be a fact-finding hearing. And when I say fact-find, that's a specific thing, but fact-finding, I mean the judge looking at the case. Have we got all the information that the judge needs to make a decision in the case? If we haven't got all of the information that the judge thinks we need, there will be a list given, and we call that directions. So there'll be a list given as to, right, okay, we need evaluation of this property, or we need a letter from the GP or the school, depending on as I say, what sort of case we're talking about. So that first court appointment is really that directions appointment, the judge just finding out what's the case about, what further information do we need. The second court hearing is usually, again, depending on what you're in, is usually some form of dispute resolution. And that's the judge looking at the information that you've got together and talking to the people and seeing, can we actually reach a resolution in this case that everybody's, content enough with to walk away at this point. And then the third and final hearing would be a trial, if I can put it that way, where a more common, what people would more commonly think of going to court, is going to be where you're likely to have to give evidence if that's what's been decided, and then the judge is going to make a decision. So in the vast majority of cases, there is going to be at least 2, if not more, hearings. And I think sometimes a bit of a common misconception is that everything will be sorted out at the first case, the first hearing. And whilst that can happen, in my experience, that will be the minority. Most legal processes are going to be 2 or 3 or more hearings.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, when you're going into this kind of process, and as we've heard, there may be 2 or 3 different hearings. What kind of support are you able to offer, Karen, and what other kind of support perhaps is out there that people can perhaps call on to support them through this process?
So exactly like Fiona's just done there, giving clients that guidance and that explanation about what to expect with each particular hearing that they're going into. So we can do a lot of work on visualizing of that, you know, really kind of talking through what they want to propose, what are they trying to achieve out of each hearing, you know, what are they concerned about, what do they think the outcome is going to be, you know, and each person has a choice to make at each stage. You know, they know how much they can cope with as well. You know, do they want to push certain issues forward, or are they willing to negotiate a little bit? And some of how the court process goes can be determined by your behaviour, but quite often it's determined by the other side as well. So you may end up going through more court hearings than you actually want to go through, but that's, you know, no fault of your own. And I think it's just having that insight before you go in, doing as much preparation as you can. Then one of the services that I provide is that IDVA support in court. So you can now take somebody who is trained in supporting victims of domestic abuse into court with you for emotional support. That direction only came in April, so it's quite new, but it's really useful because you can have screens, you can request screens so that you don't necessarily have to see your ex sitting in the same room as you. Those screens can be super useful, but of course you can still hear your ex. And for some people, that can cause quite a lot of anxiety. Now, I'm not allowed to speak in court if I attend, but I can, when we have breaks, I can guide you through it. I can help explain. I can help debrief things. I can be with you all of the time, so you're never on your own. And I can make little notes. So it can be really useful. That can be something that can really help you when you're in the moment within the court hearing. And then again, we can debrief afterwards. You know, how do you feel it went? Was there some positives? Was there some negatives? Sometimes how you think it went can be different to perhaps my perspective as a professional. You know, when you're in it and you're very emotional, you can feel like you haven't been heard or you haven't been listened to, or maybe you didn't achieve what you wanted to achieve. But actually, sometimes when I look at it from that objective perspective, it's not as bad as you thought, you know, and we can put a different slant on it and work and prepare for the next stage.
Brilliant. Karen, could you explain a little bit more about the IDVA so that people can perhaps, they can take, you know, that away and they can perhaps Google it, they can find out more, they can do a bit more research about that role?
Sure. So an IDVA stands for Independent Domestic Violence Advocate. Now, these are the people who are professionally trained to be experts in supporting victims of domestic abuse. Now, lots of IDVAs work within the charitable sector for organisations like Refuge Organisation and Women's Aid Organisation. You may have an IDVA allocated to you if you are getting support from one of those organisations. Perhaps you're what you would classify as a high risk case. Perhaps you've had police involvement, perhaps you've got social services involvement, etc. Now, those IDVAs can provide really practical help as well as emotional support and safety planning and all that kind of stuff. And they can come to court with you. The downside to having that kind of IDVA support is that they are charitable run and they have very limited resources and very limited time. So they may be able to support you in between court hearings, but they may not actually be able to come to the actual court hearing with you because they just simply don't have the capacity to do that. And that's where I can come in, because I have that background, I have that qualification, but I work privately as a coach. So it's kind of that package. It's there if you want it. If you don't want it, that's fine too. We can do the coaching around it.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly from my perspective, I quite often do sessions with my clients prior to hearings around how to really emotionally prepare. You talked about visualization a little bit earlier, Karen, but sort of mentally rehearsing how you want to be on that day, how you want to be in that space, and how you can be really, really well prepared in advance. So just little things like um, deciding what you're going to wear in advance, perhaps buying something new so that it doesn't have any sort of emotional attachment to anything else, and you can kind of maybe even get rid of it afterwards.
Mhm.
A lot of my clients end up sewing like a red ribbon in or something like that that they can perhaps touch as a kind of anchor
Yeah.
for calming through the procedures. And then there's practical stuff like making sure that you take enough food, enough water, post-it notes and a pen, that kind of thing that you might not ordinarily think of. So there are lots of tips and strategies. Is there anything else that you would add, Karen, in terms of helping how you help your clients to feel more confident going into those different hearings? Perhaps similar things to the stuff that I do.
Yeah, well, I have a big long list of things
Yeah.
that you can do before. Your preparation doesn't start on the morning, it starts the night before or sometimes the week before, because you need to build yourself up for this. You need to psych yourself up for it. Of course, it's going to be difficult, but you will get through it and you will get out of it and you will be okay. So just grounding yourself a little bit. What do you call them? Fidget toys, or just even a
Like
little
stress
makeup,
balls.
makeup sponge or something like that. Just secrete that in your trouser pocket. Nobody knows that it's there. If you start to feel the anxiety overwhelming, or you start to feel a bit panicky, just give a few squeezes of that and it really kind of calms you down. And if you can't take an infant with you to court, taking a friend with you or a family member, somebody that can be there to support you, somebody else that can drive the car and navigate the traffic, so you don't have to stress about that. It's just one less thing to think about on the day. Can be really useful. They can't go into court with you, but they can be there waiting. They can encourage you, they can support you, they can get you home at the end of the day. And making sure that you've got childcare sorted as well for your children, so you're not panicking in case court overruns. You usually have a time slot for your court hearing, but sometimes they can run on longer, and you don't want to be panicking about putting extra money in the car park or getting a parking ticket or not being able to get your kids from nursery, etc. So those real kind of like little practical things can really help you just feel more happy about the whole thing.
Yeah, fantastic. Fiona, is there anything that you advise your clients as well in advance?
Yeah, I think the only other thing that I'd add to that really is don't feel afraid to ask for breaks. I think for us as professionals, we, as guilty as anybody, getting caught up in the moment. It's our work environment, so it's an environment that we're used to and comfortable with, as you might expect. And because we're trying to think of quite a few things all at once, your legal advisor might just not pick up on the fact that actually you could do with taking a break. So don't feel that you have to go with the flow all the time. Obviously, if the judge has asked you to go into court, then we do have to respect that. But at other times, there's very likely to be a chance for you to take a break or even go outside of the court building, have a breath of fresh air. So don't be afraid to ask for that.
Thank you very much. And then there are some other questions that I think you mentioned sort of some of the special measures, Karen, that you can have in the courtroom during the hearings. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about those. So I often get asked, will I have to wait in the same waiting room as my ex beforehand?
Usually not. No, it does depend on the layout of the individual court. Some are more modern buildings than others, but there is usually a space that you can get away from your ex. You can request that beforehand. It's a tick box on the special measures form, or you can just ask on the day. Ask the usher of the court, the person that checks you in when you get through security. Ask if there's a separate waiting room that you can have. Some of them have lots of different waiting rooms. Others have courts that are not being used, and you might find a space within that unused court room to just kind of be away from other people. Always useful to have that, because you really don't want to sit there just feeling intimidated or feeling quite vulnerable.
Yeah, thank you. And then while the hearing's actually going on, will my ex be able to actually ask me questions directly? Will they be able to speak to me directly? And would I have to put up with that? It's
No,
another question I get asked a lot.
they shouldn't be. If they've got legal representation, then it should be their barrister that will be asking the questions. If they're not represented and they're litigant in person, then they should be asking the questions to the judge or the magistrate, and then they should be asking the questions to you. You don't have to be questioned by your ex necessarily. No.
You. Fiona, is there a specific way in which you need to request these measures? Is that something that you do as part of the
Yeah.
legal process?
So as Karen says, there's no harm in asking when you do actually get into the court building, if that's how things play out. But ordinarily, what we would do is actually make a separate court application for what we call special measures for vulnerable clients, and vulnerability might be for all sorts of reasons. So it's a standalone application, and we can say from a whole list of things those special measures that we want. So that would include separate entrances, separate entrance times, different waiting spaces, physical screens in the actual courtroom, and then for written questions to be put forward. So if your ex-partner is a litigant in person, they would be required to write down any questions that they want to ask you, and those would be reviewed by the judge before the actual hearing, so that the judge could decide to what extent, if at all, they were allowed to ask the question in the way that it's been phrased. And then the judge would put those questions forward. And since the introduction of new domestic abuse legislation, there is also the potential for the judge to order a representative for a litigant in person. So there's a new system where barristers have put themselves on a list, and they can be called upon by a judge where there is a case that has involved domestic abuse, or there is an abusive ex-partner who is a litigant in person, and that barrister is effectively employed by the court system to represent that person for that hearing, again to avoid the situation that we used to experience where abusive ex-partners were effectively cross-examining in court. So yeah, I would recommend that it is done as a separate application, because all of these, some of these things do come down to resources, and sadly you do hear about situations where there just aren't enough screens in a court building to accommodate all the cases that day. So if you want to make sure that you've got everything that you need, you do have to be a bit selfish about it and put forward your application in good time. And we would usually, speak to the court manager a couple of days before, just to make sure that message had got through and everything was right and in place for the hearing.
Really, really helpful. Thank you very much. So earlier on, we mentioned in passing sort of fact-finding hearings, and I wondered, Fiona, if you could explain, well, first of all, what is an official fact-finding hearing, and what does one look like? What happens in one?
Yeah, so in cases where domestic abuse has been alleged, and this is particularly in children cases, the court will have to decide at an earlier hearing whether or not it needs to reach a decision as to whether or not those allegations are true. Now, in some cases, the court may decide that it doesn't need to look into those allegations in too much detail, but in other cases they decide that yes, we do need to find out one way or the other whether these allegations are true. So what they will then hold is a fact-finding hearing, and it's sort of a standalone hearing in the progress of your court case. Before the fact-finding hearing, you will have prepared a statement and a schedule of your allegations, setting them out, and what the allegations actually are. And the other person will have had an opportunity to write their statement in response to those allegations. And then what would happen on the actual day or few days of the fact-finding hearing is that the case would be opened by your representative, usually a barrister, for a fact-finding hearing. And you would, as the person making the allegations, you would give what we call examination in chief, which is where your barrister asks you a few questions about the allegations that you're making. And then you are cross-examined by the representative for the other party or the judge, as I've explained earlier. Then it swaps over and it's the turn of the person who's being accused. They will be asked questions by their representative and then cross-examined by your representative. And after that process has been gone through, the judge will make a decision as to whether or not they find on what we call the balance of probabilities, which means that they find that the things are more likely than not to have happened. So they decide it on that basis. They look at the evidence and say, is it more likely than not that these things happened in the way that's alleged? And they will go through the schedule of the things that you're alleging and say, yes, we found that to be true, or no, we didn't find that to be true. And at the end, you'll have a summary as to what those findings are. And in children proceedings, that will then, once that determination has been made, that will be then fed through maybe to CAFCAS or to the children's guardian, who will use those findings to determine the welfare issues for the children and make a recommendation based on them.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really helpful to run through that. And I know that another worry in terms, and you just mentioned CAFCAS, or the Children and Family Court Advisory Support Service. I know that it can be really worrying when you've got a fact-finding hearing coming up and you might have telephone calls and interviews and so on with CAFCAS. So, Karen, how do you work with your clients to help them really prepare for the going through that process of talking to CAFCAS? How do you answer their questions and how do you prepare for those hearings?
So again, that can be another quite stressful point during the process, because you've essentially got a professional talking to you on the phone, usually initially, and then coming into your home and asking you questions about your role as a parent, asking about your relationship with the other parent, and asking you about what you want to happen for your children. How do you see things happening in future in terms of where the children live, how the contact takes place? You become very hypersensitive as a parent, a protective parent. When you've been through abuse in your relationship, that's hard enough. And then you're coming through the legal process, and then you've got professionals coming in, assessing you essentially in terms of how you look after your children, how safe they are in your care, etc. So it can feel quite intrusive. But as I always say to my clients, if you're not doing anything wrong, you haven't got anything to worry about, right? You're a good parent. You have to remember that. You have to look at this from the perspective of the children and keep it really child focused. So what do you think is in the best interest of the children? What are you worried about in terms of the children? You know, have you got any significant concerns about your ex and how they parent the children? This is not about your relationship with your ex or necessarily about what they've done to you in the past. But if it's affecting the children, obviously that's your opportunity to bring it up, to raise your concerns, but also to talk about how you think things are going to work in future. You want to be forward thinking, because the reality is you have got children together and your ex is very likely to have contact with the children, might be 50-50 even. We don't know at that point, when you're speaking to CAFCAS, how it's going to turn out. They will make an assessment. They won't only speak to you and the other parent. They may speak to your children, depending on the age of the children. They may speak to school staff, nursery staff. They may speak to other health professionals that are involved with the children. They want to get a really rounded view of what life is like for these children and now the parents are separated, what is the best thing for those children? That's essentially what they're trying to determine. So it is your opportunity to talk about all of those things and have your voice heard. Maybe the first time you've actually had an opportunity to really have your voice heard.
Yeah, I think it's really important, the point you make as well, about not having it all looking backwards and looking at things that have happened in the past, but introducing kind of what you would like your framework to look like going forward, so that you can be putting your perspective and your what you would like to see happening in the future into the conversation. I think that's a really important point, rather than just looking backwards and thinking about what might have happened in the past.
Yeah, it's a bit of a transition,
Mm.
because you are maybe still dealing emotionally with stuff that has happened to you, but you have to switch that and start to look forward. This is your chance to get things in place that are going to work for the children.
Yeah, which is actually brings me really neatly onto thinking about co-parenting post all of this. You know, you see a lot in the press and all over the place about co-parenting and how we should co-parent and so on. But you know, I know from my own coaching and experience that co-parenting with an abusive ex is not always possible. They may just not do it, and it can sometimes feel like you're failing in some way. So, what's your advice around how people listening can cope with that, and what are their options?
You have to be realistic. A leopard doesn't change its spots, and if your abusive ex has always been abusive, they are still going to be abusive, even when you've got your court order, even though you may have been separated for a long time. When you've still got children together, you are still tied together. They still have that link to you and that ability to try and manipulate and to bully and to harass and to emotionally abuse and all of that kind of stuff. So a lot of how you manage it is essentially down to you. The child arrangement order is a framework that hopefully cuts down the need for too much communication between you and your ex, cuts down the opportunities for conflict between you, and it sets some really clear boundaries for both of you, so you know who is doing what the expectations are, what the parameters are. But of course, the reality is that people who are abusive don't like boundaries, and they will continue to push those boundaries. But you can't keep going back to court. You can't keep applying back to court. You can't keep reporting every breach. So it is about how you manage it, how you shut down that conflict as quickly as possible. So a lot of the work that I do with clients is around perhaps how you word your emails between you to make sure that points of conflict don't escalate. Giving them some tools and strategies to make sure that their ex's behaviour doesn't impact on them emotionally as much, because you have to toughen up. You have to bounce back quicker from these incidents. There are going to be incidents as you continue, but hopefully they get less and less over time. And you learn how to manage it. You become smart. You have to think strategically and less emotionally, even once you're outside of the court arena. You have to disconnect emotionally from your ex, and you have to do what we call parallel parenting. So you can't co-parent with somebody that's abusive and controlling, because they still will not want to give up that control. So you have to parallel parent. You parent how you want to parent, they parent how they want to parent, and you work around the issues.
I always say to my clients, you know, go away and have a look at parallel parenting, really research what it is, because the bit that's within your control is to be the best parent you can be on your time.
Yeah.
And it's much better to put your focus and your energy into that than into trying to make the other person different.
Yes.
Because as you've said, it's not going to happen.
No,
You know,
it's
the
not.
leopard doesn't change its spots, and it won't change.
No.
And it
If you
certainly won't change if you're
continue,
pushing for it.
exactly, and if you continue to be frustrated by that, it will just exhaust you and depress you, and that's not a good way to get through this. You have to flip it around. Take a bit of control back where you can. Ignore some of the stuff. You know, you don't need to react to it. Don't let them provoke you. Don't feed into the drama. You know, just simple things by not sharing too much information about what you've got planned, because they will always try and sabotage it.
And not sharing your emotions as well.
Not showing your
So
emotions.
not sharing when you did that, I felt really, you know, if you can show that you're having a reaction to what they've done, then that's an
They're going to
invitation
do
to
it even
repeat.
more. Yeah, they'll do it
Yeah.
even more.
No, exactly. So what I've heard clients often talk to me about parenting plans. So what's your advice in terms of, I'll ask both of you this question, I think, actually. Karen, first of all, what would you advise one of your clients who was thinking about putting a parenting plan in place? What are the most important things to think about?
Is the detail. The devil is in the detail. You need to get as much detail in there as possible so there's less wiggle room, because people that are abusive and controlling can interpret parenting plans in the way that they want to interpret it. So it's got to be quite succinct and specific and detailed. So, for example, you know, Johnny spends time with dad from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. and handovers, or whatever you want to call them, are outside the school gates at all times. You want plans for what happens in term time, what happens with inset dates, what happens with holidays, Christmas, birthdays, Mother's Day, Father's Day, all that kind of stuff, as well as thinking about some of the bigger issues. If your child is going to need to change school in a couple of years, you might want to get that decided within your parenting plan. You know, how are you going to decide that? Who's going to put in the application? How are you going to decide which school the child goes to? Who's going to register the child with the GP? How do you communicate about health issues and emergencies? So you can't litigate and put everything into a parenting plan. You can't cover every eventuality in life. There are still going to be some things that you are going to have to communicate about and make decisions on. But if you can try and get some of the big stuff in there, some of the key things that are going to potentially cause conflict or disagreement between you, if you can get it all in that parenting plan and get that as tight as you can get it, it's going to make your life a lot easier in the long run.
Great, thank you. Fiona, what would your advice be?
Yeah, so just picking up on communication after the legal system has come out of the picture, we are increasingly recommending people to use parenting apps. I think the most widely known one is probably one called Our Family Wizard, but there are others that are out there. You know, they have calendar features, they have budgeting features, and they also have AI built in, so you can do a sort of cross check if you, in the heat of a moment, send a message or type in a message that actually could be misconstrued by the other person. It will warn you about, you know, if you've used a triggering word or language that's inappropriate. So that's quite a good thing that people, you know, increasingly now we're seeing court ordering parents to use things like parenting apps. But if not, I recommend, and before those parenting apps became a thing, I always recommended to clients that they have a separate email address or a separate phone number that they give to their other parent, and they just use that for communication, so that it's not the one that you have by your bed that's bleeping all the time, but is one that you feel happy to turn off and on, and you can manage your exposure to that communication. I think, you know, I agree with a lot of what Karen said about parenting plans. The only thing that I would add to that is that please remember they're not legally binding. So you can agree what you want in a parenting plan, as much detail or as little as you like. But if the other person then rips it up in front of you and says, well, I'm not doing that anymore, you are back into a court system, because a court order is the only thing that's binding and enforceable. Parenting plans are really good, and they're good evidence of what was agreed at a point in time, but they're not legally binding. They can't be enforced.
Thank you. That's really interesting. So another worry that people have around this, and there's obviously a lot of support that people can access, is funding. So how can people fund this process, both the court process and I guess the support that they might need around the outside? Karen, would you like, or should I ask Fiona? Let's ask Fiona first, actually, on this one.
So for legal fees, I suppose the obvious thing that people's minds go to would be legal aid. So legal aid does still exist, but it has been significantly reduced in its availability. In order to be eligible, you have to prove to the legal aid agency's satisfaction that you are a victim of domestic abuse, and there's various routes for you to gather that evidence. You then have to have a good enough legal case, so you have to pass a merits test of your legal case, and finally you have to be means assessed. So there are like 3 hurdles, if you like, that you have to go through before they will grant you legal aid. But once you've got that legal aid in place, that will usually cover you for any court proceedings involving the family that you're dealing with, whether that be children cases or family finance cases. But please note, on the finance side, legal aid is not a gift, it's a loan. So if you get money or keep money as a result of having legal aid to help you with that financial case, you will have to pay back the amount that they've paid out for your fees. But it will help you immensely, because you can fund the case as it goes along, and also the amount you have to pay back is going to be significantly less than it would be if you paid privately. On the private side, we try to help people as best we can with budgeting, and I'm sure most law firms will do a combination of these things. So there are litigation lenders who will lend you the money for your legal fees while your case is going on, that we can put you in touch with. I think probably more so than that, what we would do is look at a budget with you for your legal fees and try and give you really solid idea as to what the case is going to cost, so that if you are borrowing it, whether that's from a high street lender or from friends and family, you've got a really good idea as to how much am I in for this. And I think Karen, you talked about you've got to think, how much can I put up with, which issues do I want to litigate? And sometimes things do come down to pragmatism. You might be absolutely right on legal principle, the case should definitely go your way, but if you're spending £10,000 to argue over 5, something's gone really wrong. And that's something that we've always got an eye on, is whether or not making that argument is proportionate to the cost.
Absolutely. Karen, is there anything else that you would like to add to that?
No, I think that was a really good explanation of all the options that you've got, and you may have to look at different options as you go through the process. You may start using your savings, for example, and then there may be another court hearing coming up, and then you go, oh well, hang on a minute, because I need to spend £5,000 on a barrister, so where am I going to get that money from? And you may at that point decide to get a litigation loan. Litigation loans people tended to steer away from in the past because their interest rates were quite high, but there are some lenders now that don't charge that much interest, and it can take the pressure off in some ways, because you are not so worried about the cost of everything and the financial side. You can see yourself through that process and then pay the money back, whatever you've needed over time. So there's that. What was the other thing I was going to say about lending
Well,
money?
you think that I think there's there's another point to make here, I think, is when you're going through something like this, you need a real rounded support team around you. So you may be working with a lawyer and you may be working with a coach like me or like Karen. And actually when you're working with somebody who's going to help you on the emotional side, it's going to really help you be able to cut through those emotions, see through the fog, and make the decisions that your solicitor is going to need you to make about, like Karen was saying, which parts of this do you want to take forward? What are your priorities? And also how you're going to present in court and how you can handle the whole thing. So I think it's really important to bear in mind that this isn't just it's a legal process, but there are emotional aspects around this that will help you to handle the legal process.
And that can save you money in the long run too.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
if you are feeling very emotional and overwhelmed and confused and all that kind of stuff, if you are ringing your solicitor to help you process that kind of stuff, that can be quite expensive. Whereas if you come to a coach, it can not only be cheaper, but it can quite often be more effective. And it just clears out all of that emotional stuff. And then you can think more clearly, you can make better decisions, and then you can go back to the solicitor to make the decision that you need to make and make the best decision.
Yeah,
I
because there's
always
an emotional cost, isn't there, always? Yeah. Sorry, Fiona.
sorry. I always say to my clients, you know, I'm the most expensive and least qualified coach or counsellor you will ever come across. Please, you know, get the support in the right place and not that support from me.
That's very good advice. So I think before we finish, I think what would be really, really helpful, so that we can finish on a, you know, because like Karen said at the beginning, this is a really difficult process to go through, but I'd like to finish in a way that gives people some hope that they can get through this. So I just wondered if you could give your sort of top tips, Karen, to keep your mindset positive through this, because it's so easy to get bogged down in that overwhelm. How can people watching help themselves to make sure that they come out the other end of this sane?
So I think of the family court as the family court outcome, not as an ending, but as a starting point. You know, it is a starting point for how your future time with your ex and with your children is going to be. It's not necessarily set in stone forever. If you can get something at the end of it that is an order that you can not necessarily like, perhaps, but you can live with, then that's good. It is a starting point. It's a framework. And the court proceedings can go on for a long time. Sometimes it can be a few months between court hearings, depending on the availability of court time, etc. And, you know, you might have to get reports between court hearings, and it can seem like it's just going on, but it will end. It will come to an end. You're not going to be locked in the family court process forever. So it will stop and you will be able to move on from this. And I think you have to get really good at compartmentalizing. So think about the court stuff as and when you need to. If you need to do a bit of preparation, think about it. If there's nothing happening and there's nothing that you can do to control it, then try and distract yourself and put your energy into rebuilding your life and getting things back on track. Focus on other areas of your life, because it can become all consuming, and you don't want that to happen because that will exhaust you, and you need to conserve that energy for when you do need to present yourself at the next hearing or the next appointment or the next interview.
Yeah, perhaps a helpful way to think about it is, and certainly some of my clients have found this helpful, to almost think about this as a box that you get off a bookshelf when you need to, and then you take out the bits that you need to work on at any particular time, and then you put that box back on that bookshelf until the next time you need it. You know, and hopefully at some point it becomes dusty and you don't need to open it anymore.
I like that.
Yeah, so kind of thinking that way. You know, I always think it's so important during this time to look after yourself. if you can look after yourself at you know, and go through this at the same time, you'll be able to then more able to look after your children. You'll be more you'll have more energy to prepare really well. You'll have more energy to make those decisions that you need to make. So just little things like finding something in every day that pleases you or gives you a sense of joy, finding something every day that you do that's kind to yourself, and spending time with people who lift you up rather than people who drain you, is so important. You know, your friends and family become really important during this time, but really notice how you feel when you've been with them, so that you come away feeling better.
Yeah, you definitely need a whole range of support around you, family, friends, professionals, because yeah, it's hard, so you need those people to carry you and support you through it.
Yes, absolutely. Fiona, is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I probably would say immediately after court hearings, stay offline if you can. It's not uncommon, particularly with abusive former partners, for them to try and spin, even if things haven't quite gone their way in court, they will certainly make it look as if they triumphed. And if you're then exposed to that because you're sort of having a little bit of a moment where you're stalking them on social media, or if it gets fed back to you, I think you need to have at least 24 hours where you don't post, you don't look, you just are totally not curious about what they have to say, because they don't like to come across as having lost, in inverted commas, and they will undoubtedly tell everybody that they won in inverted commas, and that isn't going to help you at all. But moreover than that, all I can say is that the majority of the people that I deal with, 95%, I never hear from again. And that means that they've gone off and lived their lives, and put all of their family court situation behind them, and that's exactly as it should be. So even though I never hear from them again, I know that they're out there living a life that hopefully isn't involving family law.
I think that's a really useful, there's a really useful visualization there as well, isn't there? You think forward 5 years, or think forward 10 years, or even 20 years. And when you look back then, this will be a small period of your life. At the moment, it feels totally overwhelming, but at some point in the future, it will be a small period in your life, that you look back on. And I think that brings us to the end of our time. So all that remains for me to do is to say a massive thank you to Karen, because you're really an expert in this area, and this has been superbly helpful for everybody that's listening. So thank you very, very much. And I'm sure we'll probably have you back again to talk about some more of this stuff, at some point in the future. And also thank you, Fiona, for bringing your legal expertise to the session. And I really hope that everybody watching has found the session very, very helpful. So thank you very much.